Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. We are focusing on Afghanistan and we are calling it Return of the Taliban. The man you see on your screen is Major General Chris Donoghue of the US Army. The night vision image shows General Donoghue getting into the last evacuation flight out of Kabul. A C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport at 11:59 p.m. on 30th August local time, marking the completion of the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. Thousands of kilometers away in Washington, D.C., US President Joe Biden declared, I quote, "Our 20-year military presence in Afghanistan has ended," unquote. The Taliban quickly took control of the Kabul airport before dawn on 31st August. Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid addressed an impromptu news conference of sorts on the runway. Now, Mujahid said, "The defeat of the United States is a quote-unquote big lesson for other invaders." So, as we speak, the Taliban is firmly in the driver's seat and quite literally at that, as this photograph suggests. But what is missed in all of this is that Afghanistan is staring at a humanitarian crisis of epic proportion. And I mean every word of it. Humanitarian crisis, epic and proportion. Now, consider this. Conflict, drought and COVID-19 have left up to 20 million people, half of whom are children, in need of humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. The World Food Programme says 1 in 3 Afghans, that is 14 million people, is hungry today. 2 million malnourished children urgently need medical treatment. 40% of crops has been lost to drought, and nearly 600,000 Afghans are displaced internally. And all this, mind you, in a country which the World Bank says is among the poorest in the world. Afghanistan's economy was worth nearly $20 billion in 2020. Only 6 countries have a lower GDP per head than Afghanistan. It includes countries such as Burundi, Somalia and Sierra Leone. The fear is economic and humanitarian crises will leave many Afghans dependent on the narcotics trade for survival. The Taliban is reported to earn billions of dollars annually from the opium trade. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime says Afghanistan's illicit drug business accounts for more than 80% of global opium and heroin supplies. So Afghanistan's slide into chaos is a potential boon to the Taliban because it will create conditions for even higher illicit opium production. Barnett Rubin, who used to advise the US Foreign Ministry on Afghanistan, says illicit narcotics trade is Afghanistan's quote-unquote largest industry except for war. Now, that's not all. There are more perplexing questions that confront India and the world. What happens with the 2004 Constitution of Afghanistan? What would a so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan come to represent? What will the imposition of Sharia entail? What about democratic gains of the last 2 decades, such as education, human rights and freedoms? Will minorities such as Hindus, Sikhs and Shia Hazaras be safe? Can the Taliban be expected to uphold women's rights and allow girls' education? Will medieval practices such as stoning or public executions make a comeback? Will Afghanistan become a fertile ground for new terrorist groups? Should the world recognize Taliban rule? And does the Taliban deserve the benefit of the doubt? There are no easy answers to some of those questions. Now, take a look at the Taliban Organogram, the organizational structure of the group. At the top is Haibatullah Akhundzada. He is 60 years old. He has been the leader of Taliban since 2016. He succeeded Akhtar Mansoor, who was killed in a US drone strike inside Pakistan in the year 2016. Now, he's an Islamic legal scholar who holds final authority over the group's political, religious and military affairs. Not much is known about Akhundzada or what he looks like except for this undated photograph. Below Akhundzada come his three deputies, Abdul Ghani Baradar, Muhammad Yaqub and Sirajuddin Haqqani. Now, senior most among the three deputies is Abdul Ghani Baradar. He is in his early 50s. He is a deputy to Akhundzada. Baradar is the head of political affairs. He was the chief of the Taliban's political office at Doha in Qatar since January 2019. In February 2020, Baradar signed the Doha Agreement on the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan on behalf of the Taliban. He was arrested in Pakistan in 2010 and released in 2018. Next, we have Muhammad Yaqub. He is the eldest son of Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban. He is believed to be in his early 30s. He is a deputy to Akhundzada. Now, Yaqub is the de facto military chief. He is reported to have been trained in guerrilla warfare by the Pakistan-based terrorist group Jaish-e-Mohammed. Then there is Sirajuddin Haqqani. He is in his late 40s or early 50s. He is a deputy to Akhundzada. He is a leader of the Haqqani Network. Now, Sirajuddin is the son of Jalaluddin Haqqani, who founded the Haqqani Network. The US designated the Haqqani Network as a terrorist outfit in the year 2012. Now, Pakistan has long been a second home for the Haqqanis. The US Foreign Ministry had put out a bounty of millions of dollars on Sirajuddin. In 2020, he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. The article was published a few days prior to the signing of the 29th February 2020 agreement between the US and the Taliban. Now, in it, Sirajuddin Haqqani wrote, "We are about to sign an agreement with the United States and we are fully committed to carrying out its every single provision in letter and spirit." But the fact remains that Taliban did not keep its word. It did not agree to a ceasefire, neither did it pursue intra-Afghan talks to a logical conclusion, nor did it agree on a roadmap for transition in Afghanistan. Then we have Mullah Abdul Qayyum Zakir. He is 48 years old. He is a former Guantanamo detainee. Ibrahim Sadr used to train Taliban youths in warfare. Next up is Gul Aga Ishaqzai. He used to collect funds for the Taliban by imposing tax on cross-border traders in Balochistan. Haji Muhammad Idris, he is the governor of Afghanistan's central bank. He used to carry out extortions for the Taliban. Abdul Baqi, he laundered money for the Taliban. He is known as Taliban Bank in terrorist circles. Then there is Najibullah, he is the intelligence chief. Zabihullah Mujahid, he is the official spokesperson of the Taliban. And Suhail Shaheen is the spokesperson of the Taliban's office in Qatar. Now, he served in the Afghan embassy in Pakistan after Taliban came to power in 1996. Next, we have Khalil-ur-Rahman Haqqani. He is the uncle of Sirajuddin and stepbrother of Jalaluddin Haqqani. He is tasked with overseeing security of Kabul city. Now, the US designated him as a global terrorist in February 2011 and put a bounty of millions of dollars on him. He's also been added to the United Nations list of terrorists. Anas Haqqani, he is the youngest son of Jalaluddin Haqqani. He is in talks with Afghan leaders such as former President Hamid Karzai and former Chief Executive and Peace Negotiator Abdullah Abdullah to form a governance system in Kabul. Now, Anas was detained in 2014 and put in jail. He was released in 2019 in a prisoner swap in exchange for Timothy Weeks, an Australian academic who had been taken hostage by the Taliban. And then there is Sher Mohammad Abbas Stanekzai. He's in his late 50s. He's an alumnus of the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun. He was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and later Deputy Minister of Health during Taliban rule between 1996 and 2001. Now, in a first, the Indian ambassador to Qatar met with Stanekzai in Doha on 31st August. It was the first contact with the Taliban which New Delhi acknowledged. While on the subject of West Asia, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have had a rather muted response to Taliban coming to power in Afghanistan. Now, this was not the case in 1996 when Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Pakistan were the only countries to recognize Taliban rule. So, what has changed? I spoke to Ambassador Anil Trigunath, who served as India's envoy to Jordan, Libya and Malta. Take a listen.
Well, as you know that the Mujahideens in 1996, when Taliban was founded in 94 and all, have been fully supported by the Saudi Arabia, by UAE, and they even recognized their government at that time. However, over time, the Taliban began with the support of Al-Qaeda, came on the horizon with the Americans, and the Saudis tried very hard after 9/11 to ask Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden to them, and which the Taliban refused, because if you remember that when Osama bin Laden met Mullah Omar, who was the founder of Taliban movement, they had agreed that in keeping with their tribal loyalties or in keeping with their friendships, they will support one another and will not undercut the other. And that's when the Saudis fell out with the Taliban. And in the meantime, of course, the Americans came and intervened in Afghanistan against the terrorist groups and Al-Qaeda and others. So Taliban became an enemy in that sense of the term, and the Saudi Arabia had to improve its ties with the Americans as they were in the dock at that moment. A very similar situation as UAE. After that, we have seen the Arab Spring has happened, and the Arab Spring means the political Islam became a major course. And here also now this time we see in certain quarters they are looking at it as if it is the same kind of hierarchy, the mullah hierarchy, the Maulvis, which are coming to power, and that is more or less like the Iranian kind of system that might come into being eventually, and that is something I think that the UAE is very much against this political Islam. Moreover, we have seen that because Qatar became the major player in the talks on behalf of the Americans, whether it was during the Qatar blockade or since they opened their first office for Taliban in Doha in 2013. So Qatar became the major interlocutor. And if you remember that during the 4 years we have seen when the Qatar blockade ensued, which ended only in Al Ula summit in Saudi Arabia, the Qataris tried to use this conference diplomacy and becoming a go-to country for all these kind of major problems, and therefore they were in the highlight and the others were turned down.
All right, now that you know about the who is who in the Taliban, let me show you a Venn diagram which would help you understand the linkages that exist between Taliban and other terror groups on the one hand, and among the Taliban, other groups and Pakistan on the other hand. Take a look at it. As you can see, the Taliban has linkages with Pakistan, which in turn has links with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the Haqqani Network. The Taliban also has linkages with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State Khorasan. The Haqqani Network is backed by Pakistan. It is considered semi-autonomous while remaining within the Taliban fold. Its founder, Jalaluddin Haqqani, was Minister for Border Affairs in the Taliban government in 1996. In 2011, US Admiral Mike Mullen described the Haqqani Network as a veritable arm of the Pakistani intelligence. The Haqqani Network is reported to be behind the bombings of the Indian Embassy in Kabul in 2008 and 2009. Now, in the 2008 attack, India lost a defense attaché, Brigadier Ravi Dutt Mehta, diplomat V. Venkateshwara Rao, and two Indo-Tibetan border police personnel, Ajay Pathania and Roop Singh. Talking about the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan now, Noor Wali Masood, the TTP chief, has renewed his allegiance to a so-called emirate. In a statement released on the TTP's social media and website, Masood pledged that his men will not spare any sacrifice for the stability and development of a Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. There's more. Heard of the Quetta Shura, Now, Quetta is the capital of Balochistan in Pakistan, and Shura means council. The Quetta Shura comprised Taliban representatives who were ousted from power in Kabul in 2001. All of which only goes to reinforce the linkages that exist among the Taliban, Pakistan, and other terror groups. As Amrullah Saleh, who was vice president to President Ashraf Ghani's government, says, I quote, "Every evidence we have in hand shows that ISK cells have their roots in Talib's and Haqqani Network, particularly the ones operating in Kabul. Talib's denying links with the ISIS is identical or similar to denial of Pakistan on Quetta Shura. Talibs have learnt very well from the master." Unquote. And yet, believe it or not, the Taliban is not, I repeat, not a terrorist organization for the US. Surprising but true. This in spite of Taliban giving a safe haven to Al-Qaeda, not turning over Osama to the US or its allies, and aligning itself with banned terror outfits supported by Pakistan. The US has designated certain Taliban members as global terrorists or imposed sanctions on some individuals, but not the organization itself. The US has designated the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan as well as Haqqani Network and Lashkar-e-Taiba as a terrorist organization, but not the Taliban. Only a handful of countries such as Russia have designated Taliban as a terrorist group. But what you need to understand is this. The operative paragraph 1 of UN Security Council Resolution 1267 of 1999 clearly designates the Taliban as an Afghan faction that supports terrorism. This resolution was adopted unanimously, which means that the US, which drafted it, also considers Taliban as a terrorist organization. For both the UN and the US in 1999, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were a single terrorist organization. But in spite of all the evidence that we just shared with you, when asked by a journalist about Taliban and Haqqani Network, the US Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ned Price had this to say. Take a listen.
My second question has to do with security around the airport. Yesterday, General McKenzie said that the Defense Department is sharing versions of information with the Taliban, and there's some coordination on security. Does that coordination extend to members of the Haqqani Network who are also providing security?
No, it does not. The Taliban and the Haqqani Network are separate entities. Yes.
The Taliban and Haqqani Network are different entities? Really? Interestingly, the very next day, the US Defense Ministry spokesperson John Kirby backpedaled on the issue by saying, reluctantly, that there is marbling and co-mingling between Taliban and Haqqani Network. Take a listen.
Do you consider the Taliban and the Haqqani Network separate entities?
Lucas, I'm not going to give you a breakdown here, a characterization of the Taliban or Haqqani. Now, Lucas, you got to remember what we're focused on here, and that's on getting more people out and getting our troops out, completing this mission. And I'm not sure what benefit it does for me to try to characterize one group or another. We know that the
people that the deputy leader of the Taliban is Surgeon Haqqani, who has a $10 million bounty on his head. People should know: are these separate entities, or
we know that there is a certain matter of commingling here. I mean, there's a marbling, if you will, of Taliban and Haqqani. What I'm pushing back a little bit on you, Lucas, is the relevance of that discussion to what we're trying to do today, which is complete an evacuation safely and to get our troops and our forces at the airport out safely. That's what we're focused on.
But there are any number of US media reports that question and disprove US government's claims. A US news website and weekly magazine called Washington Examiner reported, I quote, "The Taliban, the Haqqani Network and Al-Qaeda are deeply intertwined in Afghanistan, and the Taliban have integrated Haqqani Network leaders and fighters with Al-Qaeda links into their command structure. The local Islamic State affiliate, the ISISK, has long clashed with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, claiming that Taliban rule is illegitimate. Former Pakistani Taliban militants founded the ISISK. The group recruits Taliban defectors and it seems to have some connections with the Haqqani Network as well, unquote. New Lines magazine, which is published by the Washington, D.C. based think tank called New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy, interviewed Anas Haqqani. In it, Haqqani rejects the distinction between the Haqqani Network and Taliban. He categorically says, "We are the Taliban." That's not all. In June, the UN released a report that called the Haqqani Network, quote, "the primary component of the Taliban in dealing with Al-Qaeda," unquote. The report says, I quote again, "ties between the two groups remain close based on ideological alignment, relationships forged through common struggle and intermarriage," unquote. The report also reads, "the Haqqani Network remains a hub for outreach and cooperation with regional foreign terrorist groups and is the primary liaison between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda." There's more. The report talks about links between the Taliban and Islamic State Khorasan. The Islamic State Khorasan recruits disaffected Taliban and other militants to swell its ranks. The Islamic State Khorasan is currently led by Shahab al-Muhajir alias Sanaullah. The report says al-Muhajir may have been previously a mid-level commander in the Haqqani Network. Equally damning is an observation contained in the report that says there is tactical or commander level collaboration between Islamic State Khorasan and the Haqqani Network. The report reads, "authorized movement of personnel with a tacit understanding that both groups benefit from certain joint venture attacks is also likely, as such attacks project a weakening security situation that undermines public confidence in the government and clearly benefits both ISILK and the Haqqani Network. In this manner, one member state suggested that certain attacks can be denied by the Taliban and claimed by ISILK, with it being unclear whether these attacks were purely orchestrated by the Haqqani Network or were joint ventures making use of ISILK operatives," unquote. Surely, the US Foreign Ministry not including Taliban in its list of terror outfits is not an oversight. The only plausible explanation is that bracketing Taliban with terrorist groups would make it that much more difficult for the US to undertake and justify peace talks. 135 persons, including Sirajuddin Haqqani, are listed in the Taliban sanctions list. The US Federal Bureau of Investigation states, and I quote, "he is reportedly a senior leader of Haqqani Network and maintains close ties to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Haqqani is a specially designated global terrorist," unquote. The link between Taliban today and terrorism will be self-evident despite any attempted legal or political nitpicking. So, to come back to my original question, does the Taliban deserve the benefit of the doubt? The answer to this question depends on who you ask. The US and its allies say they will judge Taliban by its actions, not words. Others worry that a leopard cannot change its spots. Such countries fear that Taliban, Haqqani Network and Islamic State Khorasan are cut from the same cloth. Their ideology is similar. Their DNA has not changed in spite of attempts by some people to make a distinction between good and bad Taliban, new and old Taliban, moderate and hardline Taliban, and now good Taliban versus bad Islamic State Khorasan. Watch this video of Amin al-Haq, Osama bin Laden's security chief in the Battle of Tora Bora. Haq made a triumphant return to his home in Nangarhar in eastern Afghanistan within days of the fall of Kabul to Taliban. In the video, Haq is accompanied by a convoy of heavily armed Taliban in SUVs. A small crowd is seen shaking his hand and taking selfies with him. This video is further evidence that terror groups such as Al-Qaeda now feel secure enough or emboldened to appear publicly in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. So, where does Afghanistan go from here? As India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar says, the future of Afghanistan cannot be its past. At least that is what many around the world are hoping for. With that, it's a wrap, but news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.